Good morning, colleagues and guests. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you to a very important event today in the Africanization of Science workshop. This workshop is a vital step for us in the faculty as we are looking forward to embedding knowledge that is of an African nature into the curriculum. We have a program that will be very engaging, as well as thought-provoking presentations from various colleagues coming in. And we will have critical dialogue in the process and opportunities for collaborative reflection. I invite you all to participate and to work together in us solving our Africanization of the curriculum in science. But before we begin, a few house rules, and this would be the health and safety. Let us take a moment and familiarize ourselves with the emergency health and safety protocols for this venue. Nelson Mandela welcomes you all gathered here in this event to take safety very seriously. In line with our university values and ethos, we wish to share the following safety protocols to be adhered to. We all know that accidents and emergencies do sometimes occur. We need to be prepared for the possibility to do so. Please familiarize yourselves with the following exit points marked in green. In case of an emergency, an alarm will sound, but remain calm as this might be loud. Look towards the green running man at the exits. Calmly walk to the emergency exit points. Please help those that do need assistance. If there's an elevator on the floor, of which we don't have one here, but do not use it and use the stairwell for exit. Proceed to the assembly point outside and follow instructions given by the emergency controller. Do not leave the assembly point until the all clear has been issued. Nelson Mandela University thanks you for your understanding and compliance with the emergency health and safety protocols. Siyabulela, thank you, Danki. Right, so I think we can start the program. So I'd like to welcome our acting dean, Professor Zenikolo Chentu, to give the welcoming address to you all. Thank you. This is your presentation. That's good.
Right, colleagues, before we begin, maybe let's have a moment of silence, really. I mean, on the passing of Ngugi wa Thiong'o yesterday, I mean, he passed away in Atlanta yesterday morning. He was a writer and a scholar in the area that we ought to talk about today. So let's just take about 30 seconds. Thank you, colleagues. Right, thank you, Mr. Saba, for that. Mr. Saba is the operations manager in the faculty. He's also quite agile, so you can engage him in many aspects of what we do in the faculty. So thank you for that. Right, myself, I'm Zeni Chentu, and I'm the acting dean in the Faculty of Science. So what I thought I would do as I welcome you, I thought I would share, actually, so that you have a sense of who this faculty is and that you have a sense of this particular project that we are engaged in. Because we debate with ourselves on these matters as we engage this curriculum renewal process. Maybe just at a basic level, just who we are in a basic, just at the level of what we focus on. Of course, we do wish to be a transdisciplinary faculty of science in the service of society. You can track the rest of what we want to be, and of course, dealing with these in a life-changing manner, engaging in these applied and pure sciences. That's typically who we are. And of course, our brand promise is discovering, educating, and engaging to change the world. We wish to deal with education in ways that are transformative, per se. We don't even wish to separate what is research, what is teaching, what is engagement. We wish that is one. That if you're in the field researching, you bring students along. If your third year class needs to learn about what is being researched by your PhD student, then they are there. And that they are engaging with that affected community on that particular question. I think that is what we really wish to be. In a nutshell, if we had the time, we could play that video, which sort of tracks the origins of human. I wonder if Saba, you would allow 2 minutes to do that, you know? It might be problematic, of course, if it's not set up that way in this particular venue. We might have a challenge, Saba. How do you think we're ready for that? It should have been sound. There should have been sound by now, which means we're not okay.
Over the last 30 years, human origin science has reached a very important consensus. And that consensus is that all modern humans today on the planet are descended from a population that lived here in Africa. And that population evolved sometime between 200,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago. And then for some reason, around 70,000 years ago, that population left Africa and spread across the planet in what we call the Great Human Diaspora. And that first population out of Africa was a small population. It could have even been one tribe of peoples. So the origins of advanced cognition, the origins of high levels of cooperation, the origins of modern human behavior lies here in Africa. And many of us think it evolved first on the South African coast.
Probably best at this stage too, so we don't delve deep into that. But I just thought I would just share that. Let's start from our roots, because we have kind of been on this earth as modern humans with these levels of cognition for a very, very long time. And so much has happened in that space. But we need to get back to our roots in terms of actually that we are one humanity that evolved in that particular fashion. Sorry about that. Right, so let's just, in a brief nutshell, because we're talking Africanizing and a science curriculum, so it's probably important to know what this particular faculty of science does. Of course, we engage in these skills-based and technology-based subjects as well, in addition to theoretical subjects of science, which of course are in a form of your BSc program, of course, with all its sub-streams that we have defined there. And of course, with these various subjects, and if you interact with HODs, of course, they struggle with that understanding of Africanization of some of these subjects, given how they've evolved in the literature over a long period of time, and the constructions of that type of knowledge, and of course, the social structures that accompany then how you gain access in those subjects. I think science struggles with those kinds of things. But that's why we're here today, Prof. Kate, to deconvolute some of those challenges. Just to share with you that this faculty has been doing some work in this area, by the way. I mean, colleagues engaged the botanical community, the nomenclature section of that community at an international botanical congress in Madrid, to change the name of some of the names of plants that seemingly have insensitive epithets, such as Kafra. That's Thrina Kafra originally. I think I know that tree as Umsinzi in my own understanding, you know. So that name was changed to Afra, and everything related to that kind of naming was accepted by the botanical community. The colleagues here didn't believe that that would happen, and the vote was more than 60% for that change on the work that they have done. So we are at an international level engaging in that space, and of course that report is in this particular publication of the faculty. But let's just get back again to just what we want to be and who we think we are and where we want to be in the sciences. Of course, I talked about life-changing science education. And the very first strategic goal there is to renew and Africanize our curriculum, which is what brings us here today to engage with this matter. We are dealing with others in various ways, but on the curriculum question, that is where we are. But let's take a moment, because many voices haunt us with this question. Let's start with the voice of President Ramaphosa and listen to what it says at the renaming, of course, of our own university, where he says a new university is born today. In its birth, it is challenged to redefine higher education in our country. From now on, the many thousands of students passing through these gates will have the name Nelson Mandela in their resumes. Will they too go to become unifiers, innovators, and internationalists? Will they too dream of a new society founded on equality, the pursuit of human happiness? And will they have the skills, knowledge, and consciousness to strive together to build such a society? A new university is born today. Second voice that haunts us is that of our Vice Chancellor, who talks about the question of what are universities for? You know, I'm not going to read the whole thing. And of course, she goes into Zeleza, who talks about of course, the benefits of having massified higher education and how that, of course, has then highlighted other issues of social inequalities, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, she implores us to consider the question of transdisciplinarity. And this was in 2018. So that's why in our strategy, you see that we wish to be a transdisciplinary faculty of science. So these things have sources in terms of where they come from when we place strategy. Right, and of course, we allow others to agitate. I see Olwam Mwazi is also encouraging us. I saw an article just early this month. Hi, Olwam. Sorry, hi, Olwam. I saw in the Herald that people are reading about what we want to do. This was after the Mandela and Science debate that was arranged by the Office of Prof. Kiet and CriSHET, as well as the Mandela Foundation. Welcome, Ver. And Olwam then put out this publication. I like the part I've highlighted in red. You know, you can read for yourself. Yeah. He says, what character attributes make NMU science graduate? One cannot help but venture into a dark room hoping to find a matchstick here and a candle there. Then one can illuminate the room by scratching a matchstick against the walls. And of course, we're fumbling in the dark. But that's why we are here, to deal with these difficult questions. And of course, he goes on to give examples of how Dada Madiba himself related to the sciences, your space sciences, through poetry, etc., etc., in dealing with this question. But he implores us rather not to look at the individual himself, but to rather look at his social and environmental context if we also want to emulate Mandela within the sciences. So thank you for that agitation. We welcome it. And of course, welcome to this particular event. So I'll welcome colleagues as I go through. Of course, just a slight brief reflection on some of the scholars who have been writing about this. And one of them is Ngugi, who I spoke about earlier. And as you can see, of course, their writings comes from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and of course the 80s. I mean, their challenges were more political and economic at the time, including, of course, neocolonialism was also an issue, you know. So that's why you would see Achebe talking about reconnecting with African culture and traditions, especially in the face of colonial education and Western influences. Those are neo-colonial sentiments coming from there. But of course, the question of decolonization of knowledge also exists in the same problem that they were writing about. If you look at Cabral and others. Right, but of course, there are modern scholars. Modern scholars are more focused on the economy and the politics still, that, you know, Africa needs to be in charge of its own economy, etc., etc. So this debate doesn't stop. But for now, our understanding of what we need to do is integrate African perspective, values, knowledge systems, and cultural practices into our curriculum, as well as, of course, the related pedagogy and institutional frameworks that allow for that. So with that, colleagues, I want to welcome all of you, especially my DVCs, Prof. Kiet. Thank you. You're always with us in the trenches on these debates. Thank you for that. And DVC LNT, of course, always supporting us with these ventures on curricula and many other. And of course, our DVC Jack, thank you so much also for accepting our invitation. As I said, this involves institutional frameworks. So your office is well placed to assist us in how do we make the changes that need to happen even at a structural level to deal with this question. Of course, Prof. Moranga on the research side could not be with us. He sent his apology. And of course, to our speaker for the day, Dr. Ngubane, welcome. We hope to have fruitful engagements on this topic. And I pose the questions as we go along, by the way. We don't have a position, a clear position. It's still fluid in science. So that's why I pose the question, what should the position of the faculty be on Africanization of the science curriculum? And I'm hoping that that will come out today. And of course, we've got more speakers, Chanel van der Merwe and Jackie Luke. I don't see Jackie Luke yet with us, but if she's here, welcome, and welcome other faculties and deputy deans and deans who are here. My own acting deputy dean is here. Welcome, Dr. B. Denver Davids maybe is coming later. Oh, right at the back. Okay, welcome, sir. Let's hope that we will engage that question with clarity of IKS. How do we embed it within the science curriculum? It is an important discussion. And of course, we've got some colleagues coming all the way from George, such as George Sekonya. I know they've done some work on the natural sciences in terms of decolonization in that area. And of course, everyone who's here, of course, is welcome. We've got Sean House on the chemistry, who's going to also engage on issues of multilingualism there. And of course, everyone who's here, including the program directors, and we've got students who are also going to engage in this topic. Dipua Serepe, is Dipua here? Okay, maybe she's not here yet. We've got also Nehemiah, who's going to engage within these particular discussions. Welcome, Nemo. And of course, Luzuko as well. Qinisani Kwabe will be online. Has been delegated by our own DVC here at another engagement in Stellenbosch, but he will have his video flighted here for us to interact with his input. And last, I would like to just acknowledge a few engagement and transformation portfolio. Thanks, Prof. Kiet, once again for your support, and CriSHET, and of course the LT CoLab teaching development through the UCDP funding for assisting us, of course, with this event. We appreciate Dr. Tony. And Anne has been with us in the trenches as well. I wonder if she's here. She's not here yet, but we acknowledge her. And of course, Debbie and Jenny, the Dupré sisters, have taken us to this point They actually led the organizing of this event from the CriSHET and ETP side and the faculty side. So thank you so much, colleagues. So thank you once again and welcome to this event. We look forward to the deliberations. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chenchu. So, colleagues, I think we can begin. I would like to start with our DVC panel discussion. Right, so if our Deputy Vice Chancellors can join us on the stage, please. So this is actually the first time I've actually got to sit down this morning, actually. I've been here since 7, so I decided since we are having a conversation, I might as well join in. Right, so this is actually a very important discussion, right? And I'm glad that, we have our leadership here. I mean, this will actually set the tone as to why we are here in particular. I think I'm going to start off with our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Learning and Teaching. And I think the question that I want to pose, DVC, is that what does Africanization of science mean to Nelson Mandela University, and how is it reflected in the learning and teaching strategy of the institution?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that question. Our Vision 2030 speaks about a 21st century African purposed curricula that responds to socio-economic and environmental challenges. So in 2020, we met as the deanery at the time to really look at how we can look at Vision 2030 and create a learning and teaching plan. Not just a strategy, because we've got the strategy, but how do we actualize what we speak about in the strategy? And so we look at how we become engaged as an African university, because we say that we are an African university, not just situated in Africa. And what does that mean then for us as a university, and what does it mean for our curriculum? And we put a high price really on the understanding therefore of diverse knowledge systems that need to be acknowledged in the curriculum. And over and above that, the pedagogy that we use to access that content in the curriculum. So that's where we are, because we talk about offering a diverse range of life-changing learning experiences for a better world. And then it's interpreted by different faculties in their disciplines. What does then that mean for science? If we say it's a diverse range of life-changing learning experiences, what would it mean in science? And that's the mission. But the vision says to liberate human potential through human-centered lifelong experiences. And here's the challenge. In your learning environment, how do you acknowledge different knowledges to acknowledge humanity? Because once you do not acknowledge that, it means that you are not acknowledging everyone who's here in front of you. And also being a humanizing educational philosophy university, we want to put the human being at the center. And that human being is everyone that is sitting in front of you as you engage in the learning and teaching process. Thank you.
Thank you, DVC. DVC, I like how you mentioned this knowledge and also the acceptance of everyone in the room. So, I mean, that speaks a lot towards the transformation. And I want to move now to Prof. Geert in this next question. I mean, you know, how do we ensure that the Africanization of the curriculum goes beyond symbolic inclusion to real epistemic transformation?
Thanks, Lubabalo. And of course, this is a great event to attend, I must say, because generally speaking, colleagues, you know, when you engage with Africanization in the sciences, the first response from scientists is that that's not for us. You know, those are for other knowledge fields, but it's not for the sciences, not for the natural sciences. So that's already the first barrier, you know, that I think our faculty is crossing, and that's great. The second one is that there is in the science faculty and in sciences across the 7 faculties already work on the go with regard to grappling with the question of science, Africanization and decolonization, and there are great examples in this space. And the reason why I'm mentioning is because I want people to think of the possibilities that are already demonstrating themselves within the spaces within which we work. And I've noticed that also in some of our inaugural lectures from our natural scientists or scientists from the science faculty. And 2 years ago, we also had an event with regard to science and the decolonization project. And you can just go through the web pages. There are massive online resources of scientists engaging with this question. So the possibilities are infinite. That's the first point. Right? And those possibilities, they became infinite because scientists has already started asking the question of how do they free themselves epistemically. Right? Otherwise, this event would not have happened, Chair. So that's already the way in which we need to work. We also have to work perhaps at an international resource for the decolonization and Africanization of the sciences, where people can draw on many resources across the globe as to what is happening, you know, around the question of the natural sciences. At that event of 2 or 3 years ago, Catherine Odora Hoppers also indicated, also even in the question of not only the orientation of the sciences, but also the scientific method is not a neutral method either, and that's also the question that scientists must explore themselves, right? And whether it is possible for the way in which modern sciences are capable of engaging with how scientific enterprise were conducted within African traditional societies, okay? And that's the responsibility of scientists themselves. And of course, there's sufficient evidence to suggest that that has happened. It simply doesn't come through in our work, just in the way in which the scientific mind has been disciplined to work. But of course, this process is a way of rethinking that. I'm glad Zeni put forward, you know, that understanding of Africanization, and of course, you know, we have written a lot about that, especially in the CriSHET space, and that at least 6 categories of definitional parameters for Africanization. I'm not going to bore you with those kinds of things, but the one that we are more aligned to is a simple definitional parameter, and that is Africanization means to better locate Africa and Africa in knowledge. To better locate Africa and Africans in knowledge. Now, that may include a number of other kinds of things. And so then to move beyond the symbolic, i.e., that you have, less of a branding exercise in Africanization, but rather a deep renewal of the curriculum at play, would require that not only the scientific epistemes are being consistently questioned, but also in ways in which that critique can open up for other ways of scientific knowing that come into play as well. And those possibilities are there, of course. The question then that's important is that we can think of it in two ways. The one is the epistemic orientation of the sciences, but also the learning and teaching orientation of the sciences, and how different kinds of knowledges comes into play that provide for young people the opening pathways beyond the modern understanding, or at least the conventional understanding of sciences. And just the last point that I would like to make, Chair, the one is that around the natural sciences and the social sciences, the intuitive, spontaneous emergence of a transdisciplinary project on indigenous knowledge systems in our university is something to behold. It must just be written up properly, Doc, so we just have to write up this work properly. But in our previous Indaba, you could see the way in people in the health sciences, the people in the sciences, the people in humanities. There's Denver there at the back, in which people, of course, coordinate themselves within that particular space, which, of course, is a very, very doable way of hooking in the project of Africanization into the natural sciences. So we already have that one. But then the other one, of course, also is Africanization, if it means also in the context of decolonization to see yourself a bit more clearly. The sciences also has to acknowledge its complicity in the problems of the world. The way in which it both provides for solutions to human challenges, but also create the different kinds of evils that comes with the scientific enterprise as well. And that doesn't come through, the way in which we think of our knowledges, because our knowledges are never, never, ever innocent. The contribution of science to the racism project has been written, you have massive, writings on that as well. So there is something about a disciplinary attitude that must be rooted in a form of humility and a form of complicity. And I think that the values that we would attach to the notion of Africanization will better permeate the sciences if we have that particular orientation. There you are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Prof. Kiet. These conversations, yeah, you have to take a deep breath for that one. Huh? And, Prof. Kiet, what I enjoy and what I take from what you've mentioned is the notion that, we must be responsible, even in our approach towards Africanization. So, even if you look at it from a global context and we're bringing it back home, I think one of the things is that let's bring it back to Nelson Mandela, and I think I'm going to invite DVC Jack onto this one. What institutional reforms or governance changes do you think are needed to truly support an Africanized approach to science and innovation?
No, thanks. Good morning, colleagues, and thanks. Prof. Chentu for inviting us to be part of this important gathering. Yeah, it's a difficult question. When I was reflecting about, and thanks for those slides, Prof. Chentu, especially the reference to those authors. I was just thinking as to if you think about us having been liberated as a continent, beginning in the late 50s, 60 years later, maybe the elephant in the room is why the continent has not totally decolonized. Why are we still grappling with this question? And again, you find the answers being given by some of the authors that you have mentioned. That particularly Fanon, Ngugi, Cabral, and Biko, that the biggest hindrance is what I referred to when I was talking to students last Friday on the reflections on 10 years of Fees Must Fall, is the reality that the mind did not fall, that continues to produce and reproduce the status quo. And when you survey literature, it suggests that the first thing is the decolonization of the mind that basically produces and reproduces the status quo. And again, one of the greatest scientists makes this point, Einstein, that the world as we know it is a process that has been created by thinking, and it can only be changed by a change in that in thinking. So what is the kind of mindset that has produced the existing structures that perpetuate colonialism? Not necessarily colonization, but colonialism. So in my view, the first thing we've got to tackle, painstaking as it is our collective mindset. I don't know, Prof. Kiet, how to do that, but I think we've been doing that in various ways, as the university. Now, related to that is the whole question of rethinking leadership. The dominant paradigm around leadership is that one that privileges individualism, control, some kind of performance, as opposed to the kind of leadership paradigm that privileges collective agency, collective journeying, co-creation, intellectual humility, and so on. Now, if we succeed in rethinking leadership, then it's going to be easy to then effect change into the entire ecosystem that is supposed to enable and facilitate the Africanization of our universities. But if we are unable to tackle this question of a mind that reproduces these Western paradigms, I don't think that we're going to succeed. As I learned, let me just make one example to just illustrate that what I'm trying to say is this project is a project of our collective reclamation. I mean, I'm a rural boy. Now, my father tells me that some nature conservationists or environmentalists arrived at our village. Our village has got, I think, more than 4 indigenous forests. So they came to basically educate them about how to look after the forest. Now, the villagers have lived with these forests for years. I'm a product of those forests. Those forests contributed to my growth, for instance. I know everything that is in those forests, including food that is produced that is produced, by those forests. So they come and tell them and kind of teach them how to look after these forests. And my village has got relatively uneducated people. So then my father says, hey, they come and tell us this. And then we ask them one question. They say these people come from provincial government. We ask them one question. So you are coming here for the first time. We've never seen you. So how do you think that we have sustained this forest for all these years? They couldn't answer that question. Now, the assumption is these people don't have knowledge to sustain these forests as part of their own being as the villagers. That talks to this education that alienates self from self, basically. These conservationists who are educated don't know that the kind of education they got, in part, alienates them from themselves, such that when they go into this particular village, they don't ask them, but how have you sustained these forests? And then learn, from these villagers. And then as part of that conversation, and then say, but you can also do 1, 2, 3, So I'm talking about this aspect of indigenous nationalism. So the point that I'm arguing is, when you're talking about structural transformation, structural change, at the center of that should be what kind of thinking produces those types of structures, and for what good reason. Thank you.
Thank you, DVC. Well, these conversations are actually flowing quite nicely because, when you speak about self, I think one has to also think of self in terms of how do we communicate with thyself, And when we speak of this communication, I think the next question I want to pose to DVC Learning and Teaching, Dr. Muki, so how does language then, particularly the use of African languages, how is it leveraged in terms of or considered in science education and research dissemination?
Yeah, thanks, Saba. Not enough. And I think I want to go back to what is language? Because most of the time we divorce language from learning, which is a big mistake because you cannot learn without language. And in most cases, scientists think that, no, we're not good in language. And yet, accessing that science is through language. And language is the carrier of culture. And once you understand that, you would understand it in your pedagogy, that you need to understand or to convey that learning in a language that is understood. And I know a lot of people just take it as a simple thing to think that when we say that you need to acknowledge the language of the learners in your classroom, oh, I can't speak Xhosa, oh, I can't speak isiZulu. But there are methodologies within learning and teaching where you can use learners in your classroom to access the learning material amongst themselves. So I also still want to go back to language as an important, I would call it, vessel for knowledge acquisition, knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination. And if we say that, and we do not acknowledge the languages that exist in our classrooms, are we affording our students then the opportunity to acquire knowledge, the opportunity to create knowledge, and the opportunity to disseminate that knowledge? So there's a lot that we are doing and disadvantaging learners in our classrooms, students in our classrooms, if we do not acknowledge the importance of language. So the pedagogy as well is also dependent on language, because that's how you engage then with the learning and teaching that is taking place. Furthermore, language is related to thought. We as second language, third language speakers of English, you will hear us talking about sentence construction. When you engage in a learning experience, you raise your hand and you want to express yourself and you're like, yo, is it look, is it see, is it watch? Because in my language, it's only 2 words, it's not 3 words. Ukujonga, ukubona. So that thought process that you are denied as an African language speaker in a pedagogical encounter should be acknowledged. Because it takes me long, it doesn't mean that I'm stupid, but it takes me, the thought process starts in my mother tongue before I articulate in English. And that's why I say second language, third language speakers are very intelligent people. And I would like to say that there is science beyond English. Because people think that, how are we going to teach this? There's science beyond English. Lutando just spoke about the forest. And I like to make the example, which is sort of prohibited by the Xhosa culture, about ulwaluko, circumcision. The science behind it. Where you have the young men going to the bush, and then there's this white substance that they're putting on ingceke. It's a repellent. There's chemistry in it, Dr. Betts. Why do they only eat food after 8 days? Then we celebrate. Not eat food with salt, excuse me. And as you know, you accept it in hospital that after a surgery, you don't eat food with salt. Scientists would know sodium and whatever. I'm not a scientist. I'm an educationist. And the plant that they use to take care of the wound, there's science in there. And then that collectivism and mentorship that happens there. Because you have ikangata. Ingcibi is the surgeon, is the person who does the deed. But then you have ikangata, who has walked the path. So there's methodology in that. There's learning in that. You won't learn that at school. It's not in the book. But it is kept in that culture. That's why I was saying language is the vessel or the carrier. That's what he's saying. Language is the carrier of tradition, culture, identity, because that's who we are. So it's important to acknowledge that as we engage in these learning experiences that we're providing for our students, what is it that we are not providing? And furthermore, There's the hidden curriculum, and I'm going to end because I can talk most forever. So what is it that we are not saying in the classroom by the way we teach, or the pictures on the wall, who we allow into the classroom, who we invite, who we allow, what voices are we silencing? That's the hidden curriculum. It's part of that learning and teaching experience. So it's important for us to have that understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, DVC. Prof. Kiet, I know you touched on this, but if you can just give us just a brief overview on, do you think international collaborations are aligned with Africanization goals? And do you think maybe sometimes they impose epistemic constraints?
Okay, so the short answer to that would be no, because any bibliometric analysis will show you that our international collaborations follow the reproductive route of Western sciences outside of an interest in the continent itself. We are fixing that now, of course. So there's a big growth in the university now over the past 5 years on engaging African realities, which of course is one of the definitions of Africanization, is for science to respond to African realities. See, so that work is going on. And here, of course, it is the question about Africanization is not about displacing any other forms of Western science. It's about enlargement. Nah? It's about inclusivity, enlargement, but also, of course, of decentering, like the decentering that Lutando spoke about. So it's decentering of how the scientific mind is disciplined that gives it a certain type of power and authority that, of course, produces truths, of course, outside of the experiences of communities. And that's why exactly that has happened. That's the first one. And then the second one is that somebody who's steeped in his or her discipline that doesn't have a critique of that discipline, I think, should really rethink, because the true scientific mind is the mind that is skilled in disciplinary roots, but also have a very, very critical eye on that same discipline that he or her is exercising or practicing. So once you have a critique on your discipline itself, of course, you grow the discipline. You make the discipline more inclusive, you enlarge discipline, and that's also a project of Africanization that can go into that. The question of planetary health with regard to the role of the sciences, and the question of the interface between planetary health and human health, i.e. this particular climate crisis that is approaching us from the future, is not going to be solved without indigenous knowledge systems, that I can promise you, or the decolonization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because the trajectory of the Sustainable Development Goals that is produced by Western sciences, the assumption on progress and development underpinning those Sustainable Development Goals are exactly the same that have produced the Millennium Development Goals, i.e. it will hasten planetary doom. That's why if I think, for instance, one has to bring planetary health and human health together into a conversation with one another, the question about Africanization, the question of decolonization needs to be located at that particular interface. Extractive modes of thinking of progress and development, which underpin the SDGs, is not going to save us from planetary illnesses as well. And the same goes for the kind of whiteness that's located within environmental conservation as well, which we also have to debunk in the question that Lutando has raised as well. So science education needs to be contextualized. That's one of the most, what one can say, doable explanations of the Africanization project, is to contextualize science education to respond to these realities, but also, of course, upset the Eurocentric dominance as well, and the project, of course, of promoting African-led research projects and African-led scientific endeavors. Okay. The movie The Hidden Figures, as you may well know, the mathematicians that were very, crucial in the space race, Those are the kinds of things that needs to feature in our, on our walls, in the way in which we celebrate sciences in so many different kinds of ways. And you will find here, of course, in South Africa, many, many examples. I'm using now an African American example. But in South Africa and on other parts of our continent, you have massive, massive examples of those as well. So there are things that we can do. And part of the reason that makes me excited about our university is because I already see that work at play, during the work that we've done through COVID-19 has been amazing, just to see how scientists themselves, engage with this particular reality that's facing them. But let me use one particular example during COVID as a way to alert, the sciences to how we can produce harm. The COVID numbers modeling, which has certain kinds of algorithms that's used by scientists, has estimated a number of deaths within the Eastern Cape province and, of course, on the African continent, way beyond what the actual numbers later on turned out to be. And I'm not talking about being off by 5 or 10%. I'm talking about being off by 40, 50 odd percent, around those particular numbers, which, of course, and somebody has to study this. I think that those modelings were racialized. What the modelers had in mind was the question of big townships where people don't care about themselves or how they can't organize in crisis times. They've thought about the question of a continent, that is pathologized in the context of how it deals with crises. And of course, the reality has shown simply just to be the opposite. And if sciences in the modeling field, are honest with themselves, they will have to think, how did we get to? What produced these modelings in the first place? And what kind of scientific thinking and modes of modeling, created a particular narrative around that as well? That is not to say that sciences are bad. All disciplines are bad. The disciplines that I am, sociology, anthropology, we all know that all disciplines have their dark sides. And part of the project that we need to embark upon is to have a critical eye on our disciplines and then ask the difficult questions about our disciplines when, of course, we see these kinds of patterns then emerging. So around the question then of internationalization, just to circle back, would be that we will have to figure out how do we engage better. And now, of course, this little crisis with the universities being under attack globally, people are now already thinking maybe it's better that we should, amongst our 54, 55 countries, produce better relationships, scientific relationships, on our own continent. And perhaps through that, advance our own institutional Africanization and decolonization project in a much stronger way as well. But I always, want to affirm, just by my own experiences within our own university, that there is a great, great energy and, pathway and also progress around this project, Chair. And I don't want to act as if those kinds of things are not happening. That will be totally dishonest. And I think that this is a great, what one can say, intervention from the science faculty, Prof. Zeni, you and your colleagues, to keep the discussion and the questions around the role of the sciences within the Africanization project alive. I'm very happy to be part of this. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Prof. Kiet. Colleagues, I think then DVC Jack, your story that you mentioned, about this impose that people put in terms of, our knowledge systems not being as strong as they should be. That raised, some concern for me. So when I try to internalize this and we bring it back to the university in particular, what do you think, what measures do you think we should employ to staff and leadership to truly champion Africanization authentically?
Yeah, you keep on asking me difficult questions. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think the first thing we need to do, and I think Sabelo Ndlovu-Kajeni makes this point, that in the course of Africanizing our universities or decolonizing them, we've got to accept that we are the very same products of a process that we want to undo. So it sounds like a contradiction. We are products, all of us, of a colonial education. So can we then use that to undo that which produced it? So I, hence, in my view, the whole idea around a painstaking process of unlearning has to be undertaken as a collective journey. Let me come close home, Prof. Chindu. I think 3-4 years ago, there was a student who came from Lusigisigi. The student passed, I think, mathematics first class, came to our university, failed dismally, and couldn't, and ended up dropping out. So, so I asked my colleagues to engage the student. What is exactly the problem? Comes back to the point that DVC Learning and Teaching was making. Now, the student says, I was taught mathematics from sub A to grade 12 in isiXhosa. And then when I got into university, my first interaction was in English, my first class, English. So I was lost, basically. So that's the extent to which language can exclude. Not a stupid person, a bright young man. So I always then ask this question, for instance, what are our assumptions? What are the assumptions that I carry as a lecturer to the first class of first semester of the academic year? What do I assume when I get into that class in terms of the levels of knowledge or knowledges that the students carry into that class? Because if my assumptions are wrong, then I'm going to consciously or subconsciously include and exclude other students because of my level of pitching the class, which is why I think our university suggests that the first week should be just orientation. So then that talks to our assumptions about what our students bring to class. What kind of value do they bring to class? What kind of knowledge do we affirm the knowledges that they bring into class in their diversity? So in my view, we've got to then see the point that you're making, Prof. Chindu, about reconnecting. We've got to reconnect with African ways of learning and democratize the process of learning and teaching as a co-learning process, as opposed to a one-way traffic. must be a co-learning process. And the university as a whole, by the way, ought to be a co-learning process where all of us, and how we interface with our communities as well, ought to be a co-learning process, as opposed to an approach that seeks to say, I'm more knowledgeable, I'm depositing knowledge to the less knowledgeable. So we've got to therefore co-create an ecosystem that is nurturing, and in that pot you can then have quite a number of things, partnerships with those that have traversed, at the point that we're making again, Prof. Chentu, with those that have traversed the journey on the continent, put in place, set up communities of practice, research, because they are there, research African ways of learning. I mean, there is Imbadu, for instance. So formal, non-formal, and informal ways of African ways of learning. So that would be really my response. That we can't say, if we agree with my argument that all of us are the products of colonial education, so then it's got to be a collective journey of unlearning as well as relearning, of unthinking and rethinking how we basically deploy education that seeks to empower young people to solve the problems of the continent. Thanks.
Thank you, DVC. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that brings the end to our panel discussion, and I am also unlearning my time management today, so we're a bit behind schedule there. So I'm going to invite two questions to the panel. I think Ozile, my colleague might come in, but we'll have a roving mic. So just two questions for the panel, if we may have. Do we have any questions from the panel? Oh, no, from the panel, to the panel. Do you have any questions for the panel? I've already been guilty of asking difficult questions, so. Okay, there's one there.
Thank you. Can I lump two questions into one? The first question is for Prof. Kit. Prof, I don't know if you can speak a little bit about the context of funding, external funding, and how that may shape this Africanization of science progression. And the second, maybe it's more or less a comment, but also to the context of language for Prof. Muki. And my thinking is, how do we think about taking advantage of the advance in technology to create bespoke learning processes that are able to individualize languages in the process of learning for students? Thank you.
That's the one there? Is there another one, Roman? Okay. We have another question?
Yes, that's
okay. Oh, Prof. Percy, how are you?
yes. Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, leadership. Mine is really just to get some clarity on a few things. You know, as a scientist, we grapple with very small little things, and you know, if you recall, last week we had an Africa Day, and normally when we talk about Africa, we often put some timelines to it, and conveniently we look at maybe in the last 100 years in terms of the clothing that we wear, the cultures around, the food, even music. You hardly hear Amapiano, for instance, which was, which is an African still music now, but it's hardly played in African events, right? And so my question is really to understand how serious is the university regarding Africanization in the scale of 0 to 10, 10 being to say in the next Ulwaluko season, the university is going to host a number of boys, use its resources from the health sciences, because we have enough land. Why can't we work with the communities? Are we that brave, to do that? 0 being we're just gonna talk and talk and talk. Thank you.
Babalo, shall I go for the? Okay, right. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave that difficult question from Percy to.
And I'm saying,
That's why I nominate myself to go first. Yeah. No, that question about external funding is very profound. And I don't know, there's so many ways in which one's mind can move around it. One is that the external funding regime, there's an entire bureaucracy that is actually, to a large extent, suffocating universities around the question of funding, with the different ways in which funding plays itself out. But even funding that's earmarked for the Africanization project requires Africa to be written by analogy, i.e. Africa to be referenced against a Western paradigm. Now, of course, for those of us who understand the notion of difference would know that for Africanization to take its place, as an equal partner within the context of paradigmatic, frameworks, would be not to have a reference point, but to have itself as a reference point. Now, unfortunately, most of those funding regimes have the Western canon as its reference point into which the Africanization project must speak. That just reproduces the existing inequalities around epistemes in any case. So the question about indigenous knowledges on the continent is therefore so important. It actually should be one of our key projects because it has itself as its reference point. It doesn't have another reference point. That's a very crucial. So, but I have not seen in the analysis of funding regimes sufficient courage from big funders to locate a project like that, except for when it wants to be extractive in the pharmaceutical industries, for instance. Then, of course, it pursues that particular direction. But there's no benevolence in that. There's simply a form of cost-benefit, logic that goes into that particular project. And so we have to think about a kind of funding regime, a global funding regime, that can surface Africanization projects without a reference point to the existing knowledge epistemes that are so dominant. I think so that would be the way. And that's part of the reason why, even with the massive investment that we have in research funding, the Africanization project still lags behind very much in comparison to what has been invested. It's precisely because it gets assimilated into existing forms of epistemic logics, and it undercuts actually its original objectives. So there's some work to do on that front. Thank you so much for that question.
all right. No, thank you for the language question. And I think we can take advantage, and we are taking advantage of technology. I visited the Faculty of Education, I think it was on Monday, and they presented to me a software. It's called PEM 2.0, where you put in the information, whether it's a science, it's your study guide, whatever, and there's different languages. So it's Zulu. They only worked with isiZulu, isiXhosa, isiSotho, Afrikaans, and English. Immediately, just that button that you press, it translates the whole section that you've highlighted. And I read it because I know most all of these languages, to just make sure that this is proper, language. Beautiful. So those are the things that we're really working on. Over and beyond that, we are working with the virtual academy, which we are going to launch in the second semester, but assisting us to put some of our programs online in terms of access as well. And these kinds of softwares are going to assist us in that. I'm going to attempt, Prof. Langoti, to talk about the young and the old in Africa. And I think when we say student voice, sometimes we don't mean it. Because if we were saying that we want to engage with the young ones, so what does Africa look like for you? And you see TikTok everywhere, and we are making a name for ourselves. Everyone is dancing to South African music. And so we should be celebrating our creativity, in the 21st century as well. I'm not saying, leave out what we know and is close to our heart. Yesterday evening, we were celebrating first-year buddies and giving them certificates. And there was a Xhosa society performing there with Igubu, Nokhensa. I cleansed myself, because it takes me back. So all of these, are who we are as Africans. And I think also it's important, the point that they're making with health sciences and Ulwaluko. There's a project that the Dean is driving, Dean of Health Sciences, with funding from Discovery, where she works with communities in the Eastern Cape around Ulwaluko. I don't know the specifics of it, but I know that there's something like that. But then Ulutando will talk about hosting them on our campus. And have Amaboma, because that's what he's saying. Let them come here.
Right, colleagues, I think then we can close off the plenary discussion with our leadership, our Deputy Vice Chancellors. From my side, I'd like to thank you all for setting the tone for today's conversations on the workshop, and I thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.